Unaided. He just flew. He just started running on the North Rim and just flew across the Grand Canyon. Now, do you believe that claim? That I have an ancestor?
Not on its face, no.
Okay. Would you believe the claim that a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead at its face?
Not on its face, no.
Okay. What if I told you that there's a creed going back to like days, weeks, months of it happening that said that my great ancestor flew in front of 500, flew in front of 12, and finally flew in front of the author who wrote this creed? Would you believe it then?
I think from what you've described, I would be skeptical. But okay, for the sake of fun, let's say I wouldn't believe it.
Okay, I wouldn't either. If all you had was the 1 Corinthians 15 creed, would you believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead? No gospels, no epistles other than 1 Corinthians 15. Would you believe Jesus Christ rose from the dead just based on that?
Okay, based on that, no.
There was a guy named Myron who personally, it says in a document, was the brother of my ancestor who could fly. Did you believe it now?
I mean, again, that's a little bit more challenging, but I'm going to say, just for the sake of fun, that still no. I would still be skeptical.
Good. We're the same. I wouldn't believe it either. And so in the same token, would you believe it for Jesus?
If we only have
the creed and the brother James.
Only those two things, I probably would still be skeptical.
So would you believe my ancestor actually flew across the Grand Canyon if it's recorded that he had a relationship with the brother of the flying man and a couple of disciples of the flying man?
No, I would not.
Okay. Would you believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead based on a 1 Corinthians creed, that he had a brother named James and that he had a relationship with James and a couple of disciples?
Without the proven evidence, no, I would not.
Okay. Name another piece of evidence for Jesus. So with my flying ancestor, he claimed that God gave him the power to fly. And he also claimed, just like Jesus, that he was God in flesh. We have a document that says that.
Okay, that would raise the probability up, but I would say at that point I would still be skeptical. So I would not probably on that alone. But my prior would be much higher than it was when we began.
Okay, so you're probably for me. It hasn't gone up at all, but I appreciate you said it went up, but you would not believe it.
It would still be below the threshold.
Okay, if I told you that with my great ancestor that it went after he flew across the Grand Canyon, he changed the world. So would you now believe my ancestor based on the fact that so many people now believe in him and it changed their life?
I mean, it's closer, but I would say that I would still hold off, lacking one or two.
You still wouldn't believe?
I would still hold off, yeah.
Okay, so you do not, would you hold off for Jesus if this happened?
If just those were available. Again, it's much harder to say now, but I'm going to still keep on and say no.
Okay, so what if I told you that decades after the flying man reportedly flew, that there was a gospel written about my flying ancestor, but it's not signed, it's not dated, and it basically says the things about what we've discussed earlier, that my ancestor flew, he had some followers, he changed people's lives. So we have the very first gospel. Would you believe my ancestor literally flew in the past based on the first gospel and all the other stuff we mentioned? Do you think he actually flew across the Grand Canyon unaided?
No, I would still be skeptical.
Okay, so do you believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead based on 1 Corinthians 15 creed, based on the relationship with his brother James and his few disciples that was reported, that he changed the world, and that we have a first gospel called Mark?
I would say that once again the provenance is much higher, but I would still say no.
Let's throw the other three gospels that Matthew and Luke are very similar to Mark. They copy 50 to 70, 80%. A lot of the same stories. John comes much later. So with the flying man, my great ancestor, wouldn't you know that there's three more gospels about my flying man ancestor that are written decades after the first gospel? Some of it's word for word from the first gospel. Do you believe my ancestor actually flew?
No.
Okay. Do you believe that Jesus Christ actually rose from the dead, given all the previous evidence plus four gospels?
No, I'm going to say I'm still skeptical. I'm closer to believing, but I'm still skeptical.
And I'm giving you that within the flying man, there's historical consensus
in modern history,
that my ancestor actually lived, and that it names real people, real places. And that's mentioned in the Gospels, of course, of my flying ancestor, that they had sincere beliefs that my flying man ancestor actually flew. Does that make you believe that my ancestor actually flew across the Grand Canyon now?
Combined with everything else?
Combined with everything else.
Well, it's a tough one, but I'm still going to say no. I'm still going to be on the side of
We're the same, Canadian Catholic. It's unbelievable how you and I are the same. I don't believe it either. Now, do you believe it for Jesus?
Again, it's much higher in the priors, but based on those alone, no. All right, let's extra biblical reasons. So extra biblical evidence.
Extra flying man texts that talk about that these people existed.
This resurrection, that there was a sincere belief, that people were martyred for their faith in that.
Yeah. Oh man, I did.
And more importantly, there was a change in their life.
Yes, and there was a change in life. Okay. All those things. Now with the martyrdom, that's a very interesting one that we could just speak alone. But there are reports written about, I don't know, 100 years afterwards about...
It's generally conceded that at least Peter and Paul are historic. Whatever else you might want to say about them.
Yeah, we're not exactly sure if they had the chance to recant about the flying man, but I
mean... whatever. I mean, I don't need to get too apocryphal. That's fine.
Yeah, and so there are reports that written much later, up to a century later or more, that the followers who had sincere beliefs died for their belief in the flying man. And then we got other texts talking about, this belief existed and that these people existed. Do you believe that my ancestor actually flew across the Grand Canyon now?
Just to make it clear, the probability is much, much higher than we started with.
Okay.
I just want to make it clear.
Okay.
I'm going to still stick with the no.
Okay. Do you believe Jesus Christ rose from the dead based on all the evidence we've said?
I would say that my priors would be very high, very, very high, but I'm going to say no. Okay, two. One is that people who believe in him in that report real change in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, I, after believing in that, did experience a change in my life.
Okay.
And now we add all those to the priors. And now I'm going to say all of it considered, it's enough to tip me over.
Okay, well, it's interesting that this is now why you believe. Canadian Catholic, I got to tell you, I got a neighbor, not directly next to me here, but 2 doors down, about 5 years ago, learned about the flying man.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell you, my neighbor, he was a drunkard. He cheated on his wife all the time. He found out about my ancestor, and his life was radically transformed.
Okay.
I'm not just saying a little bit. He's a new man. He's been born again.
We're not talking just about your neighbor. We're talking about the experience of billions of people through history consistently.
Oh,
right?
I could go on and tell you stories about many other people who've had their lives radically transformed by the flying man. Now, here's my question to you. Do you believe my flying man ancestor actually flew unaided? I mean, just ran off that cliff and started flying across the Grand Canyon. Do you believe it now?
Yes.